Imagine for a moment that everything you love most in the world is at risk. That your most precious treasure, the one that lights up your days and gives meaning to your life, could lose everything and end up without a roof over their head. How would you react? How far would you go to protect those you love? Margot, a single mother, faced exactly this dilemma. It was a day like any other, but an official notice on her door changed everything. The paper, marked with harsh and cold words, stated that she had only a few days to pay the overdue debt on the house or be evicted. She and her 5-year-old son Liam would have nowhere to go. Margot had always fought to survive. She worked as a cleaner at Marks and Enterprises, and what she earned barely covered basic expenses. The rent for the house they lived in was high, and even working tirelessly, she could never save enough money. Now the harsh reality of losing her home was quickly approaching, and she found herself without options. Margot's heart ached as she watched Liam playing innocently with his worn-out toys. He had no idea of the burden she carried, no concept of the fear that haunted her every second. How could she explain that in just a few days, they might not have a home anymore? The despair was overwhelming. Amidst the whirlwind of desperation, hope appears in an unexpected form, yet shrouded in uncertainty. Margot, her heart heavy with fear of losing the only home she knew, had no choice but to face a conversation that could change her life. It was still very early when she headed to Marks and Enterprises, hoping to find support from her boss. As she sat in the reception area, silent tears streamed down her face, each drop carrying the weight of a mother desperate to secure her son Liam's safety. It was at that moment that Mark walked in. The owner of the company, known for his confident demeanor and the nickname the Oil King, immediately noticed that something was wrong. He approached her, his expression softening as he saw the vulnerability etched on Margot's face. He knew her from afar, aware she was a dedicated employee, always the first to arrive and the last to leave, but he had never seen so much pain in her eyes. "Margot, can I help with something?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. She tried to hold back the tears, but failed. She told him about the eviction threat, the insurmountable debt hanging over her head, and the harsh reality of having nowhere to live with Liam. Mark listened to every word intently, and what he did next was unexpected. He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for something difficult. "Margot, he began, his words coming out slowly. "I can pay off that debt and make sure you and your son don't lose your home. But," he hesitated, his gaze wavering as if contemplating what he was about to say. "There is something I'd like to ask in return." The air seemed to freeze around them, and Margot was completely stunned. Mark continued, but his voice, though steady, seemed to carry a weight he couldn't hide. "I'd like you to consider being my companion for a while." He paused, as if expecting shock, a reaction he knew would come. Margot pulled back, surprised and offended. "What?" she asked, disbelief marking every syllable. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her wounded pride clashing with the desperate fear of losing everything. Mark looked directly at her, but behind his confident demeanor, there was a tension, a hesitation that betrayed his true intentions. He knew what he was doing, but he also knew it wasn't out of selfishness or superficial desire. He needed to be sure, needed to test Margot's strength. "Margot, listen to me," he said, his voice softer. "I'm not trying to humiliate you. Since I first saw you, I've been drawn to something about you, something genuine, something pure. But I'm a man surrounded by people who only want my money, my influence. I need to know that you're different." The proposal wasn't just a test, it was a risk. Mark knew he was taking advantage of a vulnerable moment, but what he really wanted was to see how Margot would react, even in her desperate need for help. He knew she needed the money, but he also needed to know who she was inside, if her dignity was something that even the most desperate situation couldn't shake. "I don't know if you understand, but I've been alone for a long time," Mark confessed, his voice growing quieter. "I'm not trying to buy your dignity. I want to know if you're someone I can trust, someone I can really rely on, someone who sees beyond the money." Margot stood still, Mark's words echoing in her mind. She was torn, between her pride and her instinct to protect her son. Tears burned in her eyes, but she held Mark's gaze, searching for any hint that he was toying with her. Deep down, she realized he wasn't. He was also a man trapped in an invisible snare, surrounded by mistrust and loneliness. Margot's dilemma was colossal, but Mark's words didn't sound like those of a man who just wanted to use her. He was testing something deeper, and she knew that, even without fully understanding, she had reached a point of no return. Margot felt her heart shatter as Mark's words still echoed in her mind. She knew the proposal was humiliating, but when she thought about her son's future, Liam, the weight of responsibility was unbearable. With no other options, she took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and prepared to give her answer. "Mark, I accept," she said, her voice firm but laden with pain. "But I ask for everything in the world, that you never do anything to me that I don't want." She straightened her shoulders, trying to hold on to her dignity even in the midst of desperation. "I am not a woman without principles. I am not someone who sells herself. I will accompany you, yes, to events, meetings, whatever you need. But let this be clear, I will never do anything that goes against my morals." Mark looked at her for a moment, recognizing the strength and dignity she still held on to, even in such a challenging situation. He nodded, respecting what she said. "I understand, Margot, and I will never do anything to disrespect you. This arrangement will be exactly as you described, formal. I only ask that you accompany me to important commitments." Even so, accepting that proposal felt like tearing a piece of her own soul away. Margot had never imagined herself in such a situation. But when she thought of Liam, the image of her son playing innocently at home, everything seemed justifiable. His well-being was what mattered most. The first time Margot accompanied Mark to an event felt like stepping into a completely new world. He had arranged everything for her, a renowned stylist was hired to prepare an elegant dress, and a famous hairdresser took care of her hair and makeup. When Margot looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman reflected back. She looked sophisticated, stunning, but her eyes still carried the pain of having to submit to something so far from who she truly was. Before leaving, Margot made sure Liam was safe, with a trusted babysitter hired by Mark. She hugged her son tightly, trying to hide the fear that still consumed her, and set off for a night she would never forget. The event was grand. The lights, the flashes of cameras, and the presence of important people left Margot completely out of her comfort zone. Mark, dressed in an impeccable suit, offered her his arm, and together, they walked down the red carpet. Her presence at his side drew attention, and Margot could feel the curious gazes on her, but she kept her posture straight, determined to fulfill her part of the deal with dignity. Mark, for his part, noticed every detail. The way Margot spoke, how her smile lit up the room, even if it was forced, and how she maintained her essence despite the luxury surrounding her. With each event, he began to realize that she was much more than she appeared to be. Margot wasn't just a beautiful woman, she was strong, resilient, someone who would sacrifice everything for those she loved. As the days went by and the events became more frequent, Mark started to feel something different. Guilt began to weigh on his conscience. He had never truly intended to do anything immoral with her, but now, seeing how much Margot had to give up to accept the arrangement, he felt remorseful. Her strength, her unshakable dignity, and the genuine love she had for Liam made him see just how unfair the situation was. Margot continued to fulfill her part of the agreement, but always made it clear that her heart was there for Liam. And Mark, who had initially only been testing her, began to realize that perhaps the test itself had been a mistake. Even though he had never disrespected her, he knew that just the idea of placing someone in such a difficult position was cruel. Mark found himself thinking about Margot more and more. He wanted to get to know her, to understand where that strength and the light in her eyes came from. He began to admire her not only for her beauty but for who she was as a person. And more than anything, he started to wonder, could this woman whom he had put in such a delicate situation ever look at him without resentment? The days went on, and little by little, Margot started to grow accustomed to her new position beside Mark. At first, each event felt like a test of endurance, a constant reminder that she was there because of an agreement. But as days turned into weeks, she began to see beyond the circumstances that had brought her into that world of luxury and parties. Margot wasn't adapting because she loved the money or the status, it was something more subtle. She began to truly get to know Mark. He wasn't just the powerful businessman who ran Marks & Enterprises with a firm hand. When they were together, she discovered nuances of his personality that surprised her. He was attentive, polite, and strictly respected the boundaries she had set from the start. There was never any attempt to cross the line she had established, and that made her feel safe. Margot realized that being by Mark's side wasn't as difficult as she had imagined. Their conversations started to flow more naturally, and the laughter, which in the beginning was forced to keep up appearances, became genuine. Mark wasn't just the distant boss she had always thought he was. He had an unexpected sense of humor, a generous heart, and a kindness that became evident in the little things he did. Gradually, their moments together grew lighter, and Margot found herself smiling more, even enjoying his company. But even with all of that, Margot still remembered the initial reason she was there. The agreement hovered over them like a shadow, a constant reminder that her presence by Mark's side was driven by necessity, not choice. And that, on some level, still bothered her. Mark also began to feel the weight of that agreement. Something inside him was changing, and each day spent with Margot made his guilt grow. He watched her caring for Liam with so much love or saw her smiling at guests at events, and all he could think about was how much she deserved better. How unfair it was that he had put her in that situation. The problem was that now, he had fallen in love with her. One evening, during a more intimate event, Mark could no longer bear the anguish in his heart. After dinner, he asked Margot to accompany him to the garden, illuminated by soft lights, where the sounds of the city felt distant. He took a deep breath, his eyes full of regret. "Margot," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "I need to apologize, truly. When I made that proposal, I was blinded by my own need to test your integrity. But now, seeing who you are, seeing your strength, your kindness." He paused, his eyes full of deep emotion. "I deeply regret putting you in that position. I never meant to disrespect you, but I see now how unfair it was. That's why I want to release you from this agreement." Margot remained silent, taking in those words. Mark continued, a hint of sadness in his voice. "It would be hard not to have you around anymore. I've grown used to your presence, to your laughter, to the way you light up any room. But you deserve to be free, with no obligations." Margot looked at him, and her eyes, which had so often carried pain, now showed something softer. "Mark," she began, her voice firm but gentle. "It was hard for me to accept that proposal. It was a huge sacrifice for my morals and for who I am. But you were respectful, much more than I expected. You never did anything I didn't want, and for that, I am grateful." She sighed, a small smile forming on her lips. "We can be friends. I think we already are, actually." And their friendship began to grow in an unexpected way. Margot and Mark started meeting outside of events, now without any pressure or obligation. They laughed together, talked about life, and Margot began to see Mark in a new light. He was no longer just the powerful boss who had made a thoughtless proposal. He was someone who cared, someone who made her feel seen and understood. In turn, Mark realized that his feelings for Margot were only deepening. He admired her, respected her, and above all, loved her. It was on a quiet afternoon, as they watched Liam play in a park, that Mark finally found the courage to confess his feelings. "Margot," he said, turning to her, "I can't keep this to myself any longer. I've fallen in love with you. I know the way this all started was wrong, and I still carry the regret of making that proposal. But today, all I feel is love. Love for who you are, for the incredible mother you are to Liam, and for the wonderful woman you are." He took a deep breath, his heart racing. "You've brought light into my life, and all I want now is to be someone who makes you happy, not out of obligation, but because you chose me." Margot was silent for a moment, her eyes shining with tears, not of sadness, but of emotion. "Mark," she replied, her voice gentle, "I see you differently now too. At first, everything felt so difficult, so unfair. But you showed yourself to be someone with a good heart, someone who respected every boundary I set and who truly regretted his actions." She smiled, stepping closer to him. "If this is love, then I think I'm in love too. And it feels good to know it's real." They looked at each other, and in that moment, the agreement that had once bound them turned to dust in the face of the feeling that now connected them. They no longer needed any obligation. Love was enough. And so, with time, Margot and Mark transformed what had started as a cold and impersonal agreement into something full of love and meaning. Their relationship, built on sacrifices, regrets, and finally honesty, blossomed genuinely. Mark was no longer just the distant, powerful boss. He became the man who loved Margot for who she was, and she saw him as someone with a heart full of kindness. Liam gained more than just a safe home. He now had a united family, where laughter and love filled the house, with Mark becoming a devoted father figure. Together, the three of them built a life based on respect, affection, and the certainty that even in the darkest moments, something beautiful can emerge. Margot and Mark's story teaches us that true love and respect cannot be bought or forced. They must be built with patience, understanding, and integrity. Sacrifices made out of love are powerful, but the greatest gift we can offer someone is the sincerity of our heart. And sometimes, what starts off wrong can be redeemed through the power of genuine regret and kindness. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the power of love, respect, and transformation, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone special who needs to believe that even in the hardest situations, something beautiful can bloom. And of course, let us know in the comments what you thought of Margot and Mark's journey. Your support is what inspires us to keep bringing you emotional stories. Until next time.